to infinity and beyond!
This is me. This is how I win.
Were you rushing or were you dragging? Answer!
You're a wizard, Harry.
Say what again? Say what again? I dare you.
No. I am your father.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
And here we go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back inside the film room. Zach Owens here with Johnny Sobchak. We're coming at you a little bit early this week because it's a very special episode talking about Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, hitting theaters today. So we had to get our podcast out in time to coincide with the release. Johnny, I'm excited to talk about it with you. How are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well, Zach. I am excited to talk about this one. It's probably one of the top, three maybe most anticipated movies, going back all the way to January for all of 2022. So it's been a long time coming. Of course, it's been delayed several times as well for a number of reasons. But it's finally here and we've seen it, and it's coming out in the next, as of recording this, next 24 hours. So I'm excited to get into it.
As am I. And since this is a quick episode, a quick turnaround from our episode last week, aka earlier this week, in which we were talking about Film Fest 919 stuff. If you haven't listened, go check it out. We talked about all the news then. We talked about what we've been watching then. So this one's really just going to be diving right into this Wakanda Forever review. However, I will say we are recording this on a Wednesday night in the middle of the week, which means that earlier today, a new episode of Andor came out. And Johnny, I know that you haven't been keeping up with it, but you've been around the just like overall hype around it. And I know we've mentioned on here quite a bit that I'm enjoying it. Jake, former co-host, is saying that this is the best show he's seen all year. But this episode today in particular got a ton of hype. I know people were talking about it last night before it even came out, saying if you're able to do it, like West Coast, not necessarily East Coast, but like if you're able to do it, like stay up till midnight, watch Andor, because it's some of the best Star Wars that we've seen. It's so good. I did not do that. I did not set my alarm for 3 a.m. to get up and watch it when it released, but I watched it this afternoon. And it was very good. It lived up to the hype. Like I said, I guess just this last week, the most recent episode, that it was kind of like I was interested, I was into it for the first couple, and then it's really picked up. But no, all of the praise, people saying like this is the best Star Wars that we've gotten since the original trilogy. I would say that's pretty on point. It's a super cool story. This was a very climactic episode, a lot of build up from what had been the foundation that had been laid in the last couple episodes. But two really solid, obviously, like Diego Luna has been crushing it as Cassian Andor, but Andy Serkis delivered a fantastic performance today, and Stellan Skarsgård as well, who's been in it since the start. He had a fantastic monologue about the rebellion, and people have been hyping up those two performances just from this episode, but the show overall as an Emmy contender, which, I don't think anybody had that necessarily in mind when the first Andor news was trickling out. Nobody thought it was going to be an awards contender, but very impressed with it so far. Johnny, I know you need to get on it. I think it's something that you would enjoy.
Okay. I trust your word. And also I will say I'm getting more and more excited to watch it because the hype seems to grow like every week. And I was looking forward to it once I saw like more like of the trailers and whatnot going back, months now. I thought it looked quite good. And I watched the first episode when we got our screeners a while back now. and I wanted to continue watching. I just other things came up, festivals, other movies, shows, House of the Dragon. So I did not push it, but I mentioned it to Reagan, my girlfriend, and she was like, "Oh, like I was telling her just how much praise was getting heaped on this show," and she was like, "No way." She's like, "Better than Mandalorian and like all this other stuff." So I think eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, the two of us will hop on that, maybe binge it all. Because I know there's only a few episodes remaining, I believe, for the first season. So I'm maybe we'll get caught up before the finale. I mean, who knows? But I'm very much impressed by all the praise used seems to be like universal. So I'm
The
looking forward
Star
to
Wars fanboys seem to love it, as well as the,
it.
you know, casual fans, the outside looking in kind of fans. So, like you
Mhm.
said, across the board, high praise. Yeah, this is episode 10 that just came out. And we are 12 episodes in this first season, 12 in the next season before the show leads into Rogue One. But that's my pitch for anybody who hasn't started watching it to hop on board, including you. But now for the main event, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Let's get down to the review. So to set the stage, obviously, like Johnny said, one of the more highly anticipated movies of the year for both of us, for the general public as a whole, I would say. Johnny mentioned some of the production delays, obviously the passing of Chadwick Boseman, a lot of excitement about this, but also questions like just morbid interest, I guess, in seeing like what's going to happen to the story, how is this going to be pulled off, is it going to be as good as the first one? 30th
Mhm.
film in the MCU, the third movie this year, following up on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and Thor Ragnarok, and the final movie in Phase 4, which has been very up and down. As we said last week, we kind of talked about how the MCU is very uncertain right now, and this is sort of the big finale piece to end this phase and to lead us into the next one. But following up 2018's Black Panther, we've got most of the core cast returning: Letitia Wright, Tenoch Huerta is joining as Namor, Angela Bassett, Lupita Nyong'o, Denai Guerrera, Winston Duke, Martin Freeman, Michaela Coel, Dominique Thorne as a newcomer, Riri Williams, aka Ironheart. So very, very strong cast here. Currently sitting at an 87% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. I gave this an 80 out of 100, a solid. It was a very much like a 4 out of 5 through and through for me. Johnny, what's the score that you are willing to put on this before we get in here?
Oof. I'd say like maybe like a 70, I think, right around there. Mostly
Solid.
positive, but a little bit more on the mixed side compared to you. Maybe like 65 to 70 would be like right around what I'm thinking.
And I will say, for the people listening, Johnny and I did get to see this together at our screening. So
Oh yeah.
a very rare inside the film room event here, where we were watching and kind of got to discuss immediately afterwards and see each other's reactions in the movie. So that was added an extra level of excitement to this movie. But let me lay down the plot here before we dive in. Very, very abstract, not abstract, very ambiguous plot, not really giving much away as far as what we see on Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb. The people of Wakanda fight to protect their home from intervening world powers as they mourn the death of King T'Challa. So, Johnny, I kind of talked about it from the start. Before we get into any like, was this movie good? Was it bad? Like, what was your anticipation going into this? Obviously, like with the passing of Chadwick Boseman and the delays and the not scandal, but like just like stuff with Letitia Wright, like all of the like, it seems like something was always going wrong against all the odds. Like, how is this movie gonna get made, gonna be good? What was your how did you approach this movie, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. That was kind of my thinking in a lot of ways was I feel like there was so much that this movie had to overcome. I was very much in the camp of being cautiously optimistic or being skeptical about it living up to the hype that it was kind of placed on it from the first movie. I think if Chadwick had never passed, like the hype and the anticipation, all the build up to this movie would have been so immense in a different way because you know that they would have just been building out the story as it was at the end of the first movie and as it was like also at the end of Endgame, of course. which
Mhm.
was the last film that had Chadwick in it. So it's it is strange to like think about how things have shifted and like what we're dealing with now, like in the wake of that. But I of course wanted it to succeed. Like I wanted this to be good and great, and it's gonna make a ton of money. Like every time I saw the trailer in theaters, like I would just lean over to whoever I was with, usually Reagan, and just say, "This movie's gonna make so much money." Like I just think that there's no doubt about that. And the trailer, speaking of which, I think is what really shifted me more into like being optimistic about it rather than trying to doomsay and just say like, oh, there's no way this movie is going to be good. I think the trailer is just so spectacular and is still maybe the best trailer of the entire year. I That gave me a lot of optimism and like hope. So with all that being said, going into it on Monday night when we went to sit down and watch it together, I was hoping, and we also, to be fair, there had been other reactions online from other screenings and the premiere and whatnot prior to us seeing it, so it wasn't totally cold and fresh as
Right.
far as like what I knew, but I still had kind of optimistic, but knowing that I'm probably not going to love everything about it. It's probably not going to be like my favorite movie of the year, or even favorite superhero movie of the year. But I was definitely open minded. I would say in going into it. And by the time it was over, definitely had a like not super strong feeling about it, but I feel firm about kind of thinking about it now. Also, just a couple days later, like overall how I feel. But I am, I'm open to seeing it again. Maybe I'll see it again opening weekend to see it with a fans and like a big sold out crowd. But yeah, I definitely liked it, even though I don't think I liked it quite as much as you.
Yeah, I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying. Like I feel like for me the biggest thing going into this was just like the curiosity of how obviously I the original Black Panther is like one of my, I think I have it in like the top 5 of my MCU rankings. So big fan there. Love Chadwick, love the character. So I feel like my biggest thing was the curiosity and questions of like what direction is this story going to take? We heard from Ryan Coogler. He kind of came out and was talking about like, had he not passed, what was the original plan for this movie? Because they had started production before. I think I was looking at the timeline. I think they started in like June of 2020, and he passed away in August. So like they were getting ready to like rock and roll on this movie, and then had to completely change everything, take a break for just emotional purposes, and then figure out how they're going to move forward, what kind of story they're going to tell. But like we had heard that the initial plan was like, okay, it's set in it's still a movie about grief and loss, but it's T'Challa mourning the loss of time. Like he's struggling to get back into society after losing 5 years in the blip. So that was cool to hear that before going in. But
Mm,
instead, I thought that the way, I guess we'll get into like the review portion now. But there's no denying like this is a movie that is Chadwick Boseman's presence is entirely over this. T'Challa's presence, as it's a movie all about grief and overcoming, like figuring out how to cope, how to overcome your grief, or just deal with your grief, how different people are mourning.
yeah.
And I thought that overall as a whole, this movie did a very good job of like not ever feeling gratuitous, because like it could be very easy. Like I didn't expect it to at any point, but it could be very easy to like
Mm,
exploit his passing for more people to come in, or to like just treat it where in like a kind of gross feeling way rather than paying
yeah.
tribute and respect. But very much felt like the honor, the tribute, the respect to Chadwick, to this character, and it was able to do all of that in a meaningful way without it feeling like forced or shoehorned into a story just to check the boxes or something.
Hmm.
Um, so I thought that it was handled very well, and then they were also still able to use that to tell this new story, continue to like make this a Black Panther movie, a Marvel movie, like push this story forward for these individual characters. So that was something that I was kind of
Yeah.
like hesitant, interested, curious about going in, that I think lived up met my expectations and pleased me the way that they ended up handling that.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation because and to that point as well, I would say, and this is again where my more negative or like critical feelings are going to come in, I guess, but this could have been so much worse. It could have been like you said, what's a good word to say? Maybe like not as tastefully done as it was in this movie, I think, as regards to his death and everything and how to move on from his character and not even move on as in like pretend that, this day, where do you go from here with the characters, with the story, with the universe as a whole. And so I think that was done well and done with a good like heart. I think the one part that I'm feeling more negative on is that I feel like, and again, keep in mind, you said that they had a script that they did have to go back and basically rewrite everything around the fact that Chadwick Boseman died. And ultimately, I feel like you can definitely feel that. I mean, it's impossible not to because we all live in the real world and we know what happened. But also, I just think the movie has so much going on, and it is on the longer side. It's the second longest MCU film. It has so many different plot points, so many different characters, new characters, and old characters in new positions, that sort of thing. It's just bouncing a lot of like different bullet points and thematically, I think there's a lot going on as well. So that for me, I think it came off as messy in some instances because of that. But I feel like the messiness almost like, even though I do hold it as like a negative overall, I do think it almost kind of adds to like the authenticity in a way because it doesn't feel like just so glossy fabricated about how to move on from his death. Like it's like, okay, this happened, all these crazy things are going to happen now to like compensate for that, but it's just that's how it goes, like that's life, and like this is how they're acknowledging it and responding to that. So it didn't bring it down like too terribly for me, but I don't, it's not even like, oh, I wish Chadwick Boseman was alive because I wish Black Panther was different. I like that's so towards the bottom of the list of reasons why he should still be alive. But I just think even with his passing, like I don't know, I really don't even know. It's amazing that this is even a movie, honestly. I just think all things considered, and I've said that multiple times now on Twitter and whatnot. So it is what it is, but I think we're going to go here in a moment into more like detail about exactly what might be considered messy and kind of like what they have developed going forward for different characters and new plot points.
Right. I was going to say in part to like the messiness, but it working and feeling like you said, the feeling authentic, I guess, is that like with all the characters and all the different storylines that I thought it was interesting and powerful how they were able to like show all of the different ways that people are like grappling with this. Because like we've seen a ton of stuff like from the cast, like back when he passed and like around obviously like in like the press cycle now, that like these are real people who had these real relationships. So like they're bringing a lot of that emotion from real life onto the screen. So that helps make it feel extremely tangible because it is real. But seeing like Shuri and the way that she's dealing with this, and almost like if you're looking at like the different stages of like grief, like her and being in like denial and anger almost, that like her family, like she's losing her family, that she is angry at herself for not being able to use science to solve the problem and save him. And then you've got like the mother, Angela Bassett's character, Queen Raimonda, who is like very much into like this at peace with it, and this she was angry and upset at first and then like found peace with her like spirituality and the ancestral plane. And then Nakia, who doesn't come in until like I guess probably the second act, maybe like halfway through the movie, a little earlier than that probably, but who is isolated herself away from everyone and didn't even partake in the funeral and just is like dealing with it all on her own, not leaning on her community or her family that we saw in the first movie. So I thought, as messy, like you said, yes, it's messy to kind of jump around between all of these characters and spend time with each of them processing all of this, but I did think that like you said, made it feel more authentic and more real. And every one of those people that I just mentioned, those three actresses, are extremely talented and really showed off in this movie. So I didn't mind the fact that like we were spending more time with them or having to bounce between it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And yeah, all those characters that were, we would have considered supporting in the last movie definitely moved like more to the forefront in this one, and especially Angela Bassett's character, and then also Letitia Wright. And those two characters in particular, I think, responding to the death of T'Challa, have like the most emotional arcs, perhaps. And then, of course, we like Winston Duke, Denai Guerrera's character, and then also as far as like the new folks that are introduced, including I think the two most central to the plot, of course, are going to be Namor and then Riri Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And those, and not only are they because they're almost like on opposing sides in some ways, but they're like the most integral to the plot. Like they kind of, their presence in this story like ping off each other.
Right.
Not to give anything away, but like, and I thought that was an interesting way and a cool way to use those two characters and introduce them and make them relevant. Even if I thought one of those characters was Namor, namely. I thought Namor was like the highlight of the movie for me in a lot of ways, especially when it came to like the action sequences or like the more intense moments. And I thought that was kind of a smart move. And who knows if Namor was involved in any of this prior to Chadwick dying.
It's interesting because I know like people had been hypothesizing about him for a long time because of that one like throwaway line in Endgame where they're having like the I guess it's like when Captain Marvel's like on the hologram and they're having basically like a little meeting talking about like the state of everything and giving reports on their territories and stuff. And someone says something about like an earthquake in the Atlantic Ocean or something like that. And so people from then on were like, it's Namor, he's coming, blah blah blah. And like who knows, like you said, who knows if that was actually meaningful or not, or if this was something that happened after the rewrites.
Right. And so yeah, exactly. And so I think that, and I actually made the comparison. I was telling someone about the movie. I think that this, and I said this on Twitter as well, like, I think this is the most exciting and like electric introduction to a character, like a main superhero in the MCU since Black Panther, which was in 2016 in Civil War. And the interesting thing about that is in Civil War, Black Panther was a secondary like feature character in that movie. He wasn't like the main character. And so he was introduced, even though he's huge in his own right, he was introduced in that movie and played like an important role. Here, Namor and his people are kind of the same way. You get like insight and like some more hints and clues as to like their culture, as well as like more in-depth stuff. But I think that choosing Namor to be basically the antagonist was again a fun way to introduce the character and then grow that character through his own arc and then leave him at an interesting spot going into whatever projects he may show up in next, whether it's his own movie or an Avengers film or something like that.
Right. And it's interesting because you made the comparison between him and T'Challa being introduced in Civil War, but at the same time, it's also very similar and parallels Killmonger in the first Black Panther movie. Because like obviously they're very different characters, but I think Killmonger is like has a long been held as like we were in that era of like Vulture, Killmonger, Thanos being like, oh, we're finally getting like good, well developed outside of Loki, like villains rather than just like a faceless like bad guy.
Right.
But Killmonger specifically was like praised for, okay, like, yes, he has a point. Yes, he's trying to do something that makes sense. He's going about it in the wrong way. Like that's, but like people loved Killmonger. And similar here, like with Namor, like at the end of the day, his main priority, without getting into like all the specifics, is like he's trying to protect his people from outside threats, and he's asking the Wakandans to help him do that. So he's like got his community's interest at heart, and he is trying to do his best to protect them. Like, okay, yes, that's a good point, but he's also going about it in the wrong way. But like he has plenty of moments, just like Killmonger did, where it's like he's charming and charismatic, and he has these one-on-one moments with Shuri where it's like, okay, like maybe these two can work something out. Like maybe we can see an alliance forming here. And then he also has the ability to like flip on a switch and become this like enraged god, mutant, whatever, and like make you feel his wrath. So I thought that was a very cool connection to kind of carry on this legacy of the Black Panther movies, having these super well-defined, compelling villains that are also like almost verge on like anti-hero territory rather than straight up villain. Because like you said, he could be in something like he's at that position where like we don't know what route he's going to take moving forward. Could he be another bad guy coming back? Yes. Could he be like on the right side? Like who knows? Like there's a lot of opportunity there with him because of how complex he was.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the one downside to him being in this movie, being introduced in a movie that isn't his own, I should be more specific, is I feel like they do have to really, and again, this also probably goes into the fact that it was a big rewrite on this particular project. A lot has to go into quickly, and as I don't want to say like shallowly, but like doing his backstory and setting up his universe and his people in a way that, you know, just you get what you need to know and then you move on. And I feel like in some ways that is missing. Like I feel like in Black Panther, his introduction in Civil War, like you had such a strong immediate like emotional attachment to him. Part of that, of course, the biggest part of that is Chadwick Boseman as a performer. Like he is just electric and like magnetic in that role, and he just owned it. But also, you know, we get to see him interact with his father. We get to see his father killed suddenly in front of him, murdered. And then we understand like what his motivation is so deeply, and we are rooting for him. And then we understand and like have a great like emotional release at the end when he lets Zemo live and actually saves Zemo's life. I think that here it's more like, and so we got to see all that. We weren't being told all that like through like flashbacks or like backgrounds, like narration. And here you get more of that. He's just kind of telling like, this is who I am. This is what happened to my family. This is everything else. So that's the like downside. In an ideal world, we would have seen all that maybe in his own movie, or there would have been a less messy way of doing it. But unfortunately, that is what we have, and I think it still works for the most part. And that I'm not so much concerned about those sorts of things, because his backstory is important, and like knowing his motivations and everything is important. And I think his motivations are like valid and like warranted and make sense. But I think what I was more enamored with just his physical presence and just his kind of like ferocity in a lot of ways, whether it was just like dialogue scenes or actually action scenes where he's like taking it to the Wakandans and that sort of thing. So that for me again was one of the more standout points of the movie, was Namor himself, and also getting to see underwater world rather of Talokan and just having that promise of seeing more of that down the line potentially. But I thought it served its purpose well in this movie at the very least.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, that being a high point of the movie. Moving away from Namor a bit, another high point for me, and I feel like it's hard not to, we haven't really talked a lot about Letitia Wright and her performance. Like with Chadwick passing on and the mantle, not even like talking about like who's the Black Panther, but like outside of like whether like outside of the superhero, just like as a character, like Shuri is front and center here. And it's from like the very first scene of the movie. We're thrown into her emotion, her distress, and then we find out all of the information about T'Challa and his passing. And then just a huge opportunity for her to step up here. And I feel like we got very like glimpses of her in the first movie as mainly like comedic relief, whether it was like roasting her brother or like dropping a one liner, but also like showing off with her intelligence and her technology.
Mhm.
Taking center stage here, I thought she was extremely impressive. Carried a huge load of like an emotional performance as she's working through all of her feelings, but also like still channeling in a movie that is so built around like grief, still channeling some of that humor and charm, and then also being able to perform in like the big action sequences and all of that. But I feel like one of the things talking about anti-hero with Namor is that like we see a lot of similar energy with Shuri as she's kind of trying to figure out like, does she want like, is she more angry about her brother? Does she want to like channel that anger into action, and or is she instead just like trying to grieve and move on? And so we see a lot of that like inner turmoil within her. What did you think about just the way that they kind of had her explore all of these different layers to her rather than just being like more of a one note character that we saw in the first movie?
Yeah, I think that was honestly the most impressive thing they did with her character. And Letitia Wright, to her credit, does deliver a very strong performance. I think I never would have expected that we could get this
Right,
type
I
of
didn't
performance out of
either.
her. I haven't seen, to be fair, I haven't seen her work outside of the MCU, but I was very impressed and pleasantly surprised that she went from just a I mean, she had emotional moments in the other films, but I think she was mostly like known just for being like a very smart, funny, witty, kind of more comedic supporting character as like the, his little sister.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in this, like she definitely cranks up the like dramatic chops to 11. And again, when we see her in anguish and we see her in pain and she's like working through these feelings of grief and whatnot, like like it's like that's real to some degree. Like she is like working through the fact that Chadwick Boseman is dead, and like that is in reality, and she's bringing that into the movie. And I feel that she does a great job of like harnessing that, I'm sure, very real emotion and making it feel real in the moment. And her arc, I think, what I want to praise the most, because Marvel doesn't do this too often, and I think that this is what helps set this movie apart. Even though I don't think it's maybe on the same level or quite as good as the first one, I still have to think that over. I actually think they're fairly close. I think closer than most people would maybe even admit. But I think that what they do so well here is Ryan Coogler in the writing and the script is they make her, even though she's supposed to be the hero, she's supposed to be the lead in a lot of ways, they make her a little more questionable morally, I think, in some ways, again, without spoiling anything,
Mm-hmm.
than than uh than I would have expected going into the movie. I'll say that.
Right.
I
There's
think I think
the
yeah,
whole
I
line
enjoyed
of
that.
like T'Challa almost in like a Ned Stark or like a Jon Snow
Yeah,
vibe of like T'Challa was too honorable and like that's part of his demise, or like that caused issues for him. And like you said, didn't expect that whatsoever. I didn't even know what to expect from Shuri like as she was becoming a more prominent character, like because we had just seen her so much as like comedic relief. So
mhm.
whether she was going to follow in that like honorable pathway or be a different type of leader or just like character in general. Um, so that was really exciting to,
Yeah,
like you said, to see that just like exploration and her trying to figure out who she is outside of being T'Challa's sister.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. She's genuinely like a very fleshed out, more complicated, interesting character, I think, in this movie and coming out of this movie than I she would certainly than she was previously, but even more than I expected her to be actually in the movie. So that was major, I think, and I think that get is uh very much going to be a key point going forward in this universe. I think that there's been discussion and talk back and forth, and you know we know that they are not recasting T'Challa. Like that's not a surprise to anyone. So what do you do with Black Panther like as a character? And I think I understand why people are like, we should have just recast T'Challa. Like, I get why they didn't want to. I get that they felt like it was out of respect to Chadwick Boseman, like not to do it. I think eventually they are going to have to recast because I think that's just the right thing to do, and I feel like they will figure that out eventually. I think it's a little unfair that like, especially like the Black community finally gets like a major superhero on the
Mhm.
screen for the first time, and we've had how many guys play Batman, how many guys play Superman, etc. And that, that's not always been due to tragic circumstances. I understand that makes it more sensitive, but I think shelving a major Black superhero for all time because someone passes away is obviously like not like, I don't think that's the right choice. I think that maybe time will remedy that, obviously, but um I think
Just
that
as
if
long as it's not a Jared Leto follow up to a Heath Ledger
yeah.
Joker.
Right. Yeah, no. So I think, and even then, look, Joaquin Phoenix took over. I understand it's not the same exact character. It's just another version of the Joker. But when you get the right character, right actor rather, and you put them into that character, you can get great results. And I think people will respect it and be a fan of it potentially if it's done well. So, but all that is to say that I think if you're not going to replace T'Challa going forward, what they do in this movie works, and I think is still
Mhm.
interesting and compelling, and I'm curious to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. There's a lot of heroes at play. I would say one thing, well, I guess I'll say that for a bit later, but speaking of just like everything that's going on here, we haven't talked about Riri Williams, this new character coming into play. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on her, but basically this was teased. I guess it's been known for a long time that she was coming. We know that the Ironheart show is coming on Disney Plus next year, but this is her first introduction before we get more of her in that. Um, Basically, just the closest thing that the MCU has seen to Tony Stark's level of brilliance since he died in Endgame. Um, she's a college student at MIT who's working a side hustle in a car garage and has crafted up her own version of like an Iron Man style suit. And now she finds herself in the midst of a war between the Wakandans and the Talokan and whisked away to Wakanda so that she can use all of her brilliance with all of the technology that Shuri's lab has to offer. But what were the thoughts here on Dominique Thorne and the character as a whole, her portrayal, how they worked this character into the story? Because this is really the only, I wouldn't even call it like a cameo because she's a new character being introduced here, but there's no like Marvel crossover. This is very much like a self-contained Black Panther movie. You don't have to really have seen other things other than, the first Black Panther movie. Sure, if you saw Endgame or Infinity War, it helps, but like there's not a ton. You don't have to see all 30 MCU movies just to be able to understand this one. But what were your thoughts on
Yeah.
Ironheart as a whole?
Yeah, that's one of the points of the movie for me that fell a little bit more flat, unfortunately. I was looking forward to seeing how they're going to do that, mainly because I loved Tony Stark as Iron Man, and I was excited to see another Iron Man type character. It definitely feels kind of like uh it reminded me a little bit of like Peter Parker, like Spider-Man, how they introduce her character, for example, and how they play that character is like kind of like a funny, like really smart, but also really like kind of playful and like
I can totally see
joke.
that now that you're saying it.
Yeah, like it's like I'm wondering how much inspiration they took from that because I feel like it's very similar in a lot of ways. Um, but
Like
like
the eyes wide open kid in awe of everything that like
yeah,
they can keep up, but they're just in shock about everything that's happening.
yeah, exactly. And they're like, they're so smart, but they're also like goofy and like kind of dumb, like a teenager is, et cetera, et cetera. So like, I wasn't like crazy about that. I wish her characterization had been a little more nuanced and like a little more specific because it felt very broad in that way. Now to be entirely transparent, I know nothing about this character. I have not read any of the comics with this character. I don't know any of the background, so I may be completely in the wrong in saying that, but I think for a movie, in this universe, because everything is relative to the universe, I think it would have been interesting, even if this is exactly how she is in the comics, maybe just to take things like a slightly different direction or add some different wrinkles to the character. And also to just some minor gripes that I had about her role in the movie. I felt that I mentioned that I kind of liked how they kind of pinged her part of the movie off of Namor's and vice versa. I think that made it convenient and like made it easy to have those two in the movie and make it like make sense. I do need to see the movie again. I haven't like thought about her character as much, but I'm like wondering like how much sense does it make necessarily like that she was in it and like that like her like role ultimately. I think the one thing I don't like, and I'll be curious to see if you agree with me on this, is they always refer to her as the scientist, and I'm not going to say why, but a lot of times when they're talking about Riri Williams, they say the scientist, and I'm wondering if like maybe in a different draft of the script, or like maybe even in an original script before Chadwick's passing, like I wonder if they just had another character as a scientist like involved in this conflict, like involved in this plot, and then maybe they were told at some point that they could or should introduce Riri Williams, and then they went that route. But I feel like you could make this character just into another random scientist that's not a superhero or doesn't even have powers, and it wouldn't change the movie at all. I feel like, completely correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like if you actually think about her role in the movie, I feel like there's not a whole lot that Ironheart does like as a hero or anything like uber specific that makes her like really stand out. And I think that's why for me it just felt like a little flatter, like felt like it wasn't as impactful as like it could have been.
Yeah, I can see that. It's interesting. Like you said, I don't have I don't have any sort of prior knowledge of this character. I haven't read comics or any of that. But I think like you could swap this character out with anyone, or like there wasn't anything like Ironheart specific or that felt like she's in a Tony Stark suit. Basically, it could be anyone in that suit. I see what you're trying to say there.
Yeah.
That it wasn't like, okay, this had to be Ironheart to make sense to the plot.
Yeah, exactly. It almost feels like a backdoor pilot to Ironheart, the Disney Plus series coming soon. Like, and that it almost has that feeling to it. Which is unfortunate because like I was curious to see what they could do, and I feel like now I'm not like, oh man, I can't wait to see the Ironheart show. And we're like, I hope the Ironheart show is good, because like I don't really know. Like my feelings are like much more mixed than I was hoping or like anticipating. And Dominic Thorne was fine. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I will say that, like, yes, I see what you're saying about it could be anyone. But I thought that I really liked Riri as a character. So I'm the opposite. I do want to see Ironheart more, because like I said, I didn't know anything about it other than like an Iron Man connection here. But I liked the character. I definitely agree with what you're saying about the Peter Parker similarities. I didn't even think about it until you were saying that, but it's very valid. But I liked that she was like a contemporary, like someone that Shuri, because we always see Shuri like outside of with T'Challa, her brother, who is still older. Like she's always like with all of these traditionalists and people that are like uptight and used to all of the like history of Wakanda and everything. And Shuri's like the young kid, basically. So like Riri gave her, once they got to know each other, like she'd been stuck hanging out with Okoye all the time, and was now like, okay, I have another kid who is also a scientist, and like we just get each other. So I thought that they had good chemistry, good connection together, and wouldn't be upset if we see like a Shuri tie-in or something with Ironheart, because I liked them together.
Yeah, I definitely I could see that there. And just I think as far as like the performances, we've talked so much about how great Letitia Wright was, Angela Bassett, and really just like the whole supporting crew, especially the Wakandans, just because they had been around Chadwick a lot, and they in the first movie those characters had a lot of involvement with him, so I feel like you could feel the weight and like the emotion of them. Riri is definitely like more in like the space of being like the more like bright and like funny, like new character, whereas Namor is like the more aggressive, like gloomy, kind of moody
Mhm.
character. So again, like those two balancing each other out, like pinging off each other. And I think Dominic Thorne like wasn't given like a ton to do like in that way. So, and like I wasn't expecting her to deliver a Shakespearean performance like in this particular role in this movie, but I just didn't connect, unfortunately, like with that as much as I was hoping to. Like in Civil War, Spider-Man shows up for like 15 minutes, and you can criticize that movie, you can criticize his role in the movie, etc. And I have my own issues with it, but you come out of that movie like, oh my god, Tom Holland as Peter Parker and Spider-Man is amazing. Like he is so
Mhm.
funny, he's so cool. And in this, like again, it was just more of a flat feeling, and I didn't have that same reaction that I was wanting to have, unfortunately. So again, that's just like one of my more. It's not even like a major gripe. I would just say like that was one of the things that really stuck out to me as like a negative. And then there's like other just general negative things, and I'm not going to be like the big Debbie Downer, but we can get more into that in a minute if you want
Yeah,
to.
I was gonna use that as the segue, so I'm fine to go ahead and get there. Again, I gave this a 4 out of 5, so it wasn't anything for me that was like overly negative, like huge issues that took away from the movie. I was still able to enjoy this just fine, even though there were some issues. I know we've talked about like the messiness of it a little bit and some performances, but the Riri Williams Ironheart as a character leads into the discussion of like some of the CGI, some of the special effects.
Yeah.
Ironheart suit doesn't look great. I know there's a photo that was circulating today on Twitter,
A
and
very crystal clear picture too. It's not just like a bad screenshot or something.
right, and it's very much the armor as a whole looks like Power Rangers meets Transformers kind of vibe. Versus like the very sleek, iconic Iron Man suit. Like I know that they don't want to just like the character is bound to whatever it looks like in the comics. It's supposed to be different, like a spin on Iron Man. Um, but outside of just like the suit design, some of the
Mhm.
CGI with the suit, like the way that the faceplate lifts up to reveal her face, and it's just like a face within a green screen and the suit and all of that.
Yeah.
Some stuff there, like it's like at this point, like we've unfortunately come to expect it within Marvel movies. It seems like
Yeah.
and that ties into my other like bigger piece of criticism is like the third act as a whole. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
even as great as the first Black Panther is, like the third act final climactic battle is still like um
Touchy subject.
yeah, like the rhinos, the CGI, like CGI,
Yeah.
and then also just like how it goes down, because it's we talked about it afterwards in the theater. Like She-Hulk just came out and talked about like making fun of like the big CGI slugfest battle at the end, yet they're still doing it. Like it was poking fun at itself, but they're still doing it
Yeah.
with the third act here. Um, and so like that just hand in hand, the CGI issues, the formulaic battle. I will say similar to what we got in the first Black Panther, where it's like, yes, the big battle's happening, and then you've got separately Killmonger
Yeah.
and T'Challa one on one. We do get a one on one
Exactly.
between Black Panther and Namor here, and I thought that particular like fighting choreography that was much better than anything that we got um on the final like big battle between everybody else, and that had some strong dialogue between the characters there too, and was more powerful. But still, like I said, just
Yeah.
overall the same issues that have haunted much of Phase 4 in the MCU as a whole for me.
Yeah, no, I echo all of that. You summed it up very well. I don't even know if I'm gonna like try to add too much to that because even as someone that liked it more than I did, like yeah, I think you recognize some of the more again broad issues and maybe you could even call it systemic issues with the MCU. Yeah, so like it is kind of frustrating because I feel like even in a movie this big, this important, this expensive, we're still seeing these same things come up. Just a couple things. Just thinking about the humor. I don't think you didn't really get into this as much. You're focusing a little bit more on the effects, but and like the third act for me. So this is a movie. It's a big blockbuster, 4 quadrant, major franchise film. You're gonna have action. You're gonna have drama and humor and that sort of thing. The MCU movies, of course, are like known for being like quite funny a lot of the time and like having almost too much humor. That's like one of the main critiques. I didn't feel like this had too much humor. Like it definitely is like one of the more like serious movies, I think,
Hmm.
in a lot of ways, for obvious reasons. But for me, when they did try to incorporate humor through just different lines of dialogue or moments and stuff like that, it like never like worked for me. Like you and I were sitting next to each other, and I think between the two of us, we might have like laughed out loud or chuckled like a handful of times in like 2.5 hours. Like I don't think that's like necessarily like an exaggeration. It's not even necessarily like a bad thing to like not be laughing and like not have like it did not be like a full on comedy. That's not the issue. It's just more like when they did go for like jokes, like it just felt very much like I don't know, like it just seemed like they were maybe struggling to come up with like situational comedy or like just things that would make sense. Like one thing just off the top.
I know I definitely
Yeah.
laughed a couple times, but like you said, it wasn't a ton. I'm trying to think back now though, and there isn't anything that like
Yeah,
particularly
like
stands
no
out. I
lines
know,
or like moments that were like, oh, that was really funny, or like, that sort of thing. But yeah, good.
um, I know we haven't talked about him much at all, but Winston Duke is back as M'Baku, and he does have, I can't remember specifics, but he does have some good moments, humorous moments with Shuri, and I guess I do think of one when he
Hmm.
attacks Namor. That's one that I can recall.
Yeah.
But he was a highlight of the first movie and has the same sort of energy here. Um, but yeah, I definitely know I did laugh a couple times, but can't think of anything that really like stood out that's worth mentioning.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just, I think, like, for example, like one thing that it's like some of it was more like cringy. Like it was more like, oh God, like why are they talking about this or doing this? Like off the top of my head, like something that stuck out in like a bad way was that when they made that Fenty reference and like
Oh yeah.
they had like they're literally like advertising for like Rihanna's makeup line in this movie. And like not only do they make that one offhand remark, but they reference it again, like in the following scene, like as a joke, like with a new character, like mentioning it. And I'm like, oh my God, like, why are you talking about this? And it was like, it was also like kind of weird because it was like at the expense of like this other character. I'm like, what is the point? Like, why even try to like throw this in there? So it was just like weird, random stuff like that I thought was not like particularly good. Um, but overall, like that's again one of the more basic things like I would see as an issue with the MCU movies. So, like not anything surprising, but I was a little surprised at just how like much it fell flat for me. Like I would say most of the time. In fact, the funniest line in the movie was at the towards the very end, and it was at the expense of Martin Short's character, and so that was like I think what made it even
Yeah.
funnier.
Yeah.
So that was good. But outside of that, yeah, the effects not great. I will say, as we're kind of again on the more critical side here, and I'll wrap up in a second, but effects, yeah, not great, unfortunately, for whatever reason. The water effects were very good, I would say, for the most part. Like that was definitely the highlight visually speaking.
Hmm.
Not only with the water effects on land, but of course the underwater segments and Talokan, I thought was well done. Interesting to think about it and compare it like in context to what we saw in Aquaman, for example, and then also what we have seen in Avatar: The Way of Water, that's also coming up soon. Um, I would say probably not as good or as like interesting as either of those two from what we've seen so far. But
It
I
was
think it was,
very quick and dark, I would say.
yeah, it was very quick and dark. So I'm
From
thinking
what we
maybe they,
saw, like
yeah,
very like a lot of like the tour basically is like just zooming through, so we don't see a ton of like specific details. But compared to like a luminescent like Aquaman or like a very like detailed Avatar 2, I would say it's
yeah,
definitely like below both of those, but I did enjoy it and thought it was effective
yeah.
here.
It was definitely one of my more like favorite segments in the movie, but I just think it was an interesting like choice. And I'm sure, if he gets his own movie and that sort of thing, they'll expand that and make it even more detailed and maybe change the colors and like things like that after they really go in and think about it in depth. Um, so that was interesting. And then also, um, I would just say that as another like highlight to kind of finish out this compliment sandwich. The score, Ludwig Göransson, his score in this is chef's kiss, so good. I thought it was one of the best I've heard the whole year. um his original score that won the Oscar isn't one that I go back to and like listen to like on a regular basis. But when I watch that movie, when I think about that movie, I do hear it and I do really like it.
Mhm.
And I think it keeps a lot of the same like best parts of that score, but it also introduces some really fun new sounds. And I just think it really really shined brightly in the segments that it needed to, especially the emotional and more like high energy moments. So that was great. And as like a quick aside, I mentioned this on Twitter, but I thought it was interesting. I don't know if you picked up on this in the theater or not, but the throat singing that accompanied Namor's
Mhm.
like warriors, and there's like this very sinister like kind of scary scene that introduces them, and it uses the same throat singing, like, and I'm sure throat singing, like I'm sure there's different variations and sounds you can get with it, but I mean if you had told me like they copied and pasted it from Hans Zimmer's Dune score, I probably would have believed you because it sounded so similar. And they didn't overuse it, which was a good thing, but I did like it. It kind of felt like a fun, just kind of little I'm sure there's no like relationship or like correlation there, obviously, but I just thought it was a fun sound that I liked hearing again. So I thought that was neat.
Agreed. You mentioned the scene. I was thinking about it while you were talking about something else you wanted to go back to, and then you mentioned it with the opening sequence when we first meet, not the opening sequence of the movie, but when we first meet Namor and his people. It was genuinely scary. Like the way that they do this was frightening. So to talk about like the humor in this movie, but also that there was some fear in this movie. It was like felt horror inspired. It reminded me of the movie Underwater from 2020. Like
Yes, yeah.
Ocean, much better though because I did not enjoy that movie. But like just an alien-esque, like something's on the ocean floor, like out there in the darkness. Um,
Yeah.
so that was cool. I liked the way that they did it. There's a lot of like, obviously it's like MCU, so it's not like gory and violent, like gory and bloody, but there is like some pretty savage violence from his people. A lot of high body count in this movie, I would say. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt.
but any closing thoughts here on Wakanda Forever before we wrap things up?
No, I think we've had a good convo. I think it's been obviously a movie that can generate this much discussion, I think is a good sign. So I'm sure people are going to enjoy this movie. I think by and large it's going to be received quite well, especially again, all things considered, this movie is kind of miraculous. I mean, all movies are kind of miraculous in some ways, but this movie, just everything it had to overcome and to be, I think, this poignant and powerful in a lot of ways, and just an effective, like, fun popcorn movie, while still having like an actual message and like having some emotional like resonance is always a good sign. And it did leave me wanting to see more of these characters and like wondering like what the next step is going to be in their story and the MCU as a whole. So definitely recommend it. Definitely liked it. Not everything I think it could have been, obviously, and definitely, talking about that trailer, which everyone has just praised and praised and praised all year. It's not on that level. Like it's not as good as the trailer. Like the trailer is just so exceptional, but I did have like somewhat tempered expectations, and I think it didn't quite even meet those, but I think it was still like a solid movie, and it's gonna make a ton of money if nothing else. So I'll be curious to see what everyone else has to say about it.
Um, One also, as I'm closing out here, we didn't talk. I mean, we're not spoiling anything in this review, but there is, at least at the press screening, we got one post credits scene, or mid credits, nothing post credits.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
I know we had. I wanted to go back to this because we talked about it in the last episode. Questions about like this it being the end of Phase 4 and what it meant, whether it was going to be something that's setting up very much, like I said earlier, a self-contained story focusing on Black Panther, on Wakanda, on this story.
Mhm.
Very, very light on, crossover characters. And even that stinger, the mid-credit scene, is very much closing out this movie rather than moving us forward. So I feel like it's very much
Yeah.
between now and Ant-Man Quantumania in March, February, whenever that comes out. It's We don't have any breadcrumbs to be following, leading into that for Phase 5.
Agreed. Yeah, I think this is like a very solid like punctuation for the Black Panther story for the time being, and then also like just like this part of the MCU, like this phase. So agreed there. And it's like it is a very like I think when I do see this, if I do go ahead and see it in theaters again with a crowd, I feel like this moment, the mid-credit scene, and then like one other particular scene in the movie are going to get the biggest like responses, I think, and like the most like buzz in some ways. So yeah, I thought it was a great choice, and I think that they did again very respectful. Like the opening sequence, I thought was handled very well. The opening logo, and the credits and everything, the Rihanna song at the end. Like I think that they did a really good job, and then also leaving it at that, not having like a post-credit scene. Here's Doctor Doom. Here's the mutants. Here's this other thing. Like
Yeah,
I think just keeping it all self-contained in some way, in some fashion, I think was a good choice. So definitely agree there.
well, there you have it, Wakanda Forever. It is in theaters now as of the time you will be listening to this. Go check it out. Let us know what you think on social media. And thank you for tuning in week in and week out, for listening to our voices as we break down all the latest in entertainment and pop culture. We would not be able to do this without your support. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all for listening and joining us once again. To keep up to date and in tune with us, follow on Twitter, Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. And all those accounts can be found at Inside Film Room.
And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, The Rewind, and subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio, YouTube, anywhere you can find a podcast. We are there. And be sure to come back next time when we will be talking about Bones and All. Stay tuned.